think this is a really interesting question, actually, and it links to the what is reflection. You know, what and why always link together, don't they? But when I was working on the booklet for the project about reflective practice, one of the things that I really became aware of in trying to put that booklet together was when I was explaining what is reflective practice, it struck me that actually what is reflective practice is the same as what is good social work. So you almost can't separate the two, really, because reflective practice and good quality practice in social work are one and the same thing. So that's, I suppose, the basis of why it's important is if you want to be a good social worker, you need to do it reflectively. And I suppose that children and their families have a right to expect that any professional involved in their life is going to take that responsibility very seriously, and they're going to think about what they're doing, and they're going to draw on research and knowledge and understanding and think about theory and use all of that as part of their practice, because, you know, people have a right to expect that the decisions that we're making are based on thorough thought, if you like. So I suppose that's, for me, one of the main reasons it's important.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you with that. And I think it links in with our development as social workers, doesn't it? Because we're taught right from the very beginning when we go to university and we learn about what social work is and how to be a social work practitioner. We're taught that reflection links to things like emotional intelligence, empathy, resilience, self-awareness. But unless you actually take a step back and think about why you've done something in a certain way, what it actually means to you, what that might have meant to the family or the individual that you're working with, I don't think you can develop as a social worker. So I think you need to be able to take that step back and really understand yourself and the effect that that can have. And I think only through reflection can you do that, because you need to pause, you need to think about it, and you need to understand why the things you do and what and how that all impacts on the interventions that we have with families, really.
Interesting that you used the what, why, how framework loads there, didn't you, as you were talking, because it is a really good reflective framework and basic reflective framework. I also think that, as well as you know, you've said there, it's a key part of our development, and it is, and it's a key part of our training and learning. I also think it's a key aspect of self-care, really, and looking after ourselves, because you know, especially thinking about how we're working at the moment in the middle of a global pandemic. You know, here we are both sitting at home, you know, talking to each other on camera, but you know, if you're a busy social worker and you might take one of those really difficult telephone calls, and if you sat at home, then that's really hard to deal with. If you're in the office, you take one of those difficult phone calls, you know, perhaps where somebody will say, oh, I'm going to hold you responsible for this, or those kinds of things. And there's someone in the office who'll hear that, isn't there? And they'll come over and say, oh, that sounded tough. Do you want a cup of tea? Do you want to talk about it? When you're on your own, that's not there. You don't have that support in place. You're just on your own, taking these really difficult telephone calls, listening to trauma, dealing with really difficult issues, sitting in your bedroom or at your kitchen table. And actually, you really need to be thinking that through and reflecting on it and taking good care of yourself. I know that you and I have talked quite a bit about moral injury as a concept, which is really just about that, I suppose, element of where the psychological distress that the work that we do can create for us. And I've been very worried about a sort of increased experience of moral injury in staff who are working at home and working in isolation. But what we know, all of the research around moral injury tells us that the one thing that can prevent moral injury or can mitigate how significant it is reflection and reflective supervision. So I think it's, you know, there's research there that tells us how important reflection is for looking after ourselves.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think we learned quite early on in the project, really, about reflection and reflective practice and how that would support workers on the front line. the project focus was obviously on the specific model to work with in child protection, and across the kind of children and families field. But I think we realised that kind of reflection was kind of underpinning everything, that we needed to provide space and thinking time for workers. And we kind of thought about how we could bring that in to kind of my role in the project to make sure that that was happening. Because when you're really stressed and you've got a lot on with work, it can be really hard to prioritise that reflective space and reflective time. And we talk a lot about prioritising in social work, I think. But for some reason, as social workers, it can be quite hard to actually do it because we think there's always something that's more important that we need to be doing.
Absolutely. I think that takes us on to the next question as well, doesn't it?